Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us to the first webinar on best practices, how to boost approval workflows. In today's highly competitive sales environments, definitely time is money for any organization. Having a robust approval workflows in place to streamline communication and reduce any backlogs really makes a lot of difference in today's work. When implemented properly, the approval workflows have the ability to save sales and sales professionals from losing out of the precious time allocating to execute manual tasks or consolidated communication between different stakeholders. And that's where this session is coming in to address that. My name is Eran Gross. I'm the head of the customer success of the Americas team, leading our customer success and our solution experts. And today with me on the call is Ariela Duntov, one of our leading solution experts in the team. And we've been conducting multiple approval workflows implementation over the past years within DealHub. And we would like to share some of the best practices and lesson learned that we have from our team alongside with the DealHub's capabilities. We would separate these approval workflows training or webinars into two separate sessions. The first session is going to deal with and touch mainly about what we identify in DealHub, the general approval workflow. We are going to be walking through and explain how to implement approval workflows for different business scenarios with some hands-on approach. So we'll definitely show you the theory and the behind the scenes and how that articulates both for an admin managing the environment, managing DealHub, as well as for a salesperson being able to identify what kind of approvals are required for his quote and proposal to go out the door to his client. We will show everything, all of the automations behind the scenes, and we will explain the hierarchy that involves in creating such approval workflows structure. The next session is going to be planned for the 28th of this month. That's where we're going to be touching base on another element of our approval workflow, which is about what we identify as a rule-based workflow, more aligned to legal teams, finance information that needs to be captured, or any ad hoc approvals that may need to trigger alongside or in parallel to the general workflows. During this session, we would want to make sure that your questions are recorded. So feel free to put your questions into the chat. We will do our best to respond to those throughout the session itself. But alternatively, we will keep a session for a Q&A at the end of the meeting for any questions. And we're going to definitely take some of those questions and speak about them over the call itself. And at this point, I want to hand it over to Ariela to take you into the behind the scenes and explain furthermore about the approval workflows.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariela. As Eran mentioned, I am a solution expert here on the team, and I'm really happy to be taking you on this very first step of our journey of approval workflows. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we can jump right into it. All right, so we're going to start from the absolute basics. If you don't know where to find approval workflows, you're going to go to the main admin view of DealHub, and you're going to look for the left bottom corner. This has workflows and validations on it. Go ahead and click it. You'll notice there are a couple of tabs. For today's session, we're going to just focus on the general workflows tab, this very first one on the left. To create a new workflow, you're going to select Add Workflow. What I want to do now is I want to review what each of these sections, fields, and buttons do. And then I'm going to show you a couple of different scenarios of real business practices and scenarios that happen with approval workflows. And then I'll show you also what it looks like from the sales mode so we can see how it translates from the build to the function. All right, first up, we have description. Description is an open text field. This is literally just the name of this approval workflow. What's really important to keep in mind here is that this is what your sales rep will see in the sales mode. That means that if you write, general sales discount in here, that's what they will see next to the approval when it pops up in the sales mode. I'll show you what that looks like when we go into that side. Next section is active when. Active when is the condition for this workflow to enable and or to activate. Think about it this way. If this condition is not met, then this entire workflow won't actually turn on. It won't work. So you need to make sure that whatever you're putting in here is the exact condition that you need to be meeting in order for this workflow to start working. You have a few options here. You can do active when in a certain region. Let's say you want this only to work if the sales rep is in the EU region or in the US region. This can also be if they hit a certain threshold for net. So let's say if the deal is more than $1 million, we want this approval to work. You can also write true, for example, if you want this workflow to always work regardless of condition. You really have a lot of flexibility with this active when. It's not just also one condition, you can do a tier. So for example, you can write something along the lines of total net is greater than 10,000 and total net is less than 50,000 in order to capture a certain tier. So you really have a lot of room to write whatever it is that you need to get this workflow to only work in the particular cases that it needs to work on. The next section is labels. This is kind of like a tag, so you can tag your workflows. This is not mandatory. So if you don't put anything here, it's not going to stop your workflow from functioning, but this is just an additional field that will allow you to manage your workflows a little bit better, especially if you have a long list of different workflows. The next field is approval value. This one is, in my opinion, the most important piece of the workflow. Approval value is what value will the system be evaluating and or limiting. This is not the condition for when the workflow will activate, but rather what is the workflow looking at? So for example, if you want to do a workflow for different tiers of discounts, your approval value is that actual total sales discount. Or for example, if you want to look at your total margin, it's going to be your margin. So this really is the value that you want the system to be limiting or evaluating. The next piece is tolerance. This is actually part of our SMART workflow, so I'm going to skip over it now. It will be covered in our next webinar, so definitely tune in for that one. And finally, out of the top fields, we have direction. Direction is in which direction our values will be appearing in the table. I'll touch on that also a little bit further when we actually see an example so you can really see those numbers. But in general, there are only two possible answers here. It's either ascending or descending. Quick tip, best practice. You're going to use ascending for things like discounts, and you're going to use descending for things like margins. And if you ever get confused, the tooltip is here to help. You can always hover over the tooltip, and you will also see further instructions and definitions for each of these options. I'm going to take a moment here and remind you that if you have any questions, you can go ahead and pop them in the chat, and we will cover them in our Q&A section. Moving on. Immediately present for approval to all levels. You'll notice that this is by default checkmarked. We highly, highly encourage as a best practice that you keep this checkmark in all cases. Just like the tooltip says, the immediately present for approval to all levels feature works this way. Imagine you have the first tier of your discounts. There are other tiers under it in terms of people that can approve for a higher value. If you have this enabled, the way the system will work is this. It will send a notification to the primary approver, to the first approver, but at the same time, it will also show the quote in the approval dashboard of anyone that will be next in line for that approval. That kind of helps make things really fast. So for example, if the CEO happens to see this and approve it, it doesn't have to go through all the steps to get to that final approval. So it's just about making things a little bit more efficient and organized for your system. Highly encourage you keep this on as a best practice. The next one is evaluate each product separately. If this is enabled, the system will look at the approval value on the line item by itself, rather than looking at the average of all of the line items in that tag. I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later, but to talk about it a little bit further, what it does is this. Let's say you're allowing a maximum of 10% for all items with a certain tag. If this button is not enabled, the system will look at the average discount for all of those in that tag. So that means that if one product is 20% and the other is 0, the average might still trigger an approval. However, if you mark this, the system will look line item by line item. And as soon as one line item meets the condition, it will trigger the approval workflow. This could be really interesting and useful in certain use cases. So we highly encourage you look into this if this is something that would be relevant to you. And once again, I am here to remind you, tooltips are here to help. Use them when you need to. All right, let's move into now the actual build of the workflow. In this top section, we gave the general settings of the workflow, right? Like, when is it going to work? What is it looking at? What direction do we need it to go? Now we need to actually tell it, here is our hierarchy and our tier structure. I'm going to actually show you an example hierarchy, and we're going to use that as an example later on. But I want to tell you what each of these columns mean before we work about how we go ahead and start building it. All right, so we have two buttons here, add role and add tag. I'll get to add tag in a moment. Let's talk about role. Role, the way it sounds, is actually a position. It's not a specific name of a person. So the role can be taken directly from your CRM or a custom field. And it's really important to keep in mind when we are talking about roles, is the role of this person the submitter of the quote or the owner of the opportunity? Eran will touch on this a little bit later, but it's just something to keep in mind as you're building your workflows. Your role is going to be the very first person that you want to add to your structure. So let's say we're going to go ahead and build a discount structure. If I click add role, it's going to show me all available roles in my system. Okay, so you can go ahead and select one. I'll choose this one as an example, and it will start your first line. From here on out, we're going to look at primary approver. The primary approver is the first step, the very first person that this workflow will be going to for an approval. Opposed to role, this is a specific person. We need to know exactly who we're sending it to. You have two main options here. Your first option is to default to that user's manager or to another specific user within your organization, which you can choose from the dropdown. I'll use manager in this case. You also have the ability to add additional approvers. So let's say you have, a workflow that requires the approval of both the direct manager and, say, a deal desk. You can put the additional approver in here as well. But same as primary approver, we're looking for a specific person. This is not a general rule. So if it's deal desk, you're going to want to have someone that's associated with deal desk, like Oliver Lester in this example. The next column is requires approval of. You have two options here. The first one is all of the approvers or one of the approvers. These are pretty straightforward, but I'm still going to go into them. If you mark all of the approvers, that means that in order for this row, this approval to be satisfied, every single person in the approvers list here horizontally must approve this workflow, this approval. If you choose only one of the approvers, that means that if the manager approves it, but Oliver hasn't gotten to it yet, we're still good to go, or vice versa. It only requires one of the two. And again, another reminder, if you have any questions, put them in the chat so we can cover them. All right, let's talk about tag. I promised I would talk about it, so we're going back to it. Add tag. This is where we're actually going to talk about our products. If I select add tag, you'll get a pop-up that says tags, and then separate each tag into a different column. Use the tooltips, they're there for you. In this dropdown, you will see all of the tags that you have associated with your product list in this version of DealHub. Best practice for you guys. Create tags that are specific for approval workflows. So you can write, for example, AW space and then another tag, or just AW, whatever it is that you need to categorize your products. But it's going to be really helpful if you're able to just identify really quickly which tags are going to be in use for your approval workflows. This is not mandatory, but it's a good best practice to keep in mind. In this case, I'll choose, say, hardware. I'm going to click done. Once I clicked hardware, you'll notice that a new column appeared. This is now where I am able to write my threshold for this particular line of products. So what I'm telling the system at this point is this role can put I didn't put an approval value, so I'll do that here. This role can set a total sales discount of whatever number I put in here, let's say 10%, to any product that is tagged hardware. As soon as the total sales discount for this tag goes above 10%, so we're talking 10.01, 10.1, it will trigger this line in the approval process. You can add multiple tags here. So for example, I added hardware. I can add another tag next to it and give it a different value. So you really can get really flexible and creative here. You don't have to create an entire approval workflow for each line of products. You can kind of combine them all into one, which really is, one of the beauties of this feature. You can just kind of get really flexible and go into each line. At this point in time, once I finish this row, you would click Add Role to select your next role in line, and you would continue building from there. Something that's really important to keep in mind when we're talking about the structure of these rows, okay, is that every approver must exist in one of the next lines. Think about it like a zigzag, right? You want this role to have an approver, and this next approver ideally would be in the next role, and then so on and so forth. That way, the system has a really easy time in identifying how to move the approval workflow down the line of hierarchy. Another thing to keep in mind is that you're going to want your final row at the bottom to be kind of like the end all be all, like the one person or the one role in your organization that is able to approve any discount, any margin, approve anything. This person by nature will not have an approver above them because they're the closing the loop of your entire workflow. So let's say, for example, our CFO is our last line, okay? They will not have an approver and they're able to approve or to discount up to 100%, which is the maximum discount you can have, okay? This is really important to keep in mind because the system is gonna need to know when does this loop close. All right, we did this example one. I wanna actually talk about real life example and see how those are built. But before we do that, let's talk about what our example hierarchy will look like. So this probably looks very familiar to many of you. Most, if not all internal organizations have something that looks something like this. This is a really good place for us to start when we're talking about approval workflows because it allows us to really visualize the line of approval going all the way either up or in a different direction, okay? So we can look at this really quickly. You'll notice that there are two different teams of sales, right? We have one on this side, and then we have another on this side. We have a deal desk that sits somewhere in between the sales manager. Deal desk and the managers go up to the VP of sales. He sits laterally to the CFO and legal, and that goes up to the CEO. So this keeps it really easy for us when we're building our workflow where we can understand, okay, the first row that we need to talk about is our sales rep. Their primary approver will be their manager. An additional approver laterally in this case could be deal desk, so on and so forth. Okay. Before we get into the examples, I do want to show you a couple of other features that are good to know, okay? On the top right, we have our validate workflow feature. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next webinar, but just know that that is a feature for you to be able to test your workflows. So use it if you can. And then also you're able to duplicate workflows, which I think is going to be really important, especially when you have different versions of a similar workflow. So as an example, we were talking before about when to activate certain workflows. Let's say you have a workflow that is very, very similar, but one is for Southeast and one is for Southwest with only minor differences. So rather than creating two separate from scratch, you could build one, duplicate it by hitting this like two little papers icon, and then just make minor edits to it. So there to make your life a little bit easier. All right, let's hop into actual scenarios. We're going to cover a couple of scenarios in the way they were built in the admin mode. And then I'm going to actually show you what they look like in the sales mode and how they trigger those approvals going through the playbook. All right. The first scenario is probably the most common use case that we have for approval workflows, specifically for general workflows. And that's going to be the general sales discount. All right, let's see how this one's built. All right. Our description makes it really clear what we're looking at is general sales discount. Our active when, our condition, our criteria for when this workflow will start working is marked as true. In this case, it means that we want this to always be working behind the scenes. We can change this to say, we only want this to work if hypothetically, our total net, is greater than 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever. So remember, lots of flexibility of when we want this to work. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to revert back to our true. We didn't put any labels in this case because we only have 3 approvals, but again, you can use them if you need to. Our approval value is going to be an out-of-the-box field called total sales discount, okay? If you want to look at the discount of a deal, best practice is to use this one, total sales discount, okay? This is just going to give you the most accurate number for approving of discounts. Tolerance for skipping over. Direction, we hit ascending because we're talking about discounts, so discounts is ascending. Best practice, we kept immediately present for approval to all levels. We decided not to evaluate each product separately in this case. Now let's look at our table. We have our first 2 groups. You'll notice that the first 2 lines are quite similar because we have our 2 regions for sales reps. So this is our first region, which reports up to their sales manager, Victoria Harris. And then on the other side, we have the other sales region reporting to their manager. Both of those roles have an additional approver, which was Oliver Lester, if you remember. He was our deal desk. We only require approval of one, so either their manager or the deal desk. We don't need both. And we gave them their maximal threshold of discounting for these 2 tags. For SaaS products, they can go up to 15. For hardware, they can go up to 10. Now, Victoria and Robert are sales managers. So naturally, the next step we have is our sales manager. Again, here, we're still dividing by 2 separate regions. So we have 2 identical lines, one for the first region sales manager and one for the other. Now, here's actually a cool feature. You'll notice that as I'm hovering over, it actually tells you people that are in this role. That could be really, really useful for you when you're just trying to kind of make sure that everything lines up with your hierarchy. So we have our next line. These are our sales managers. They report up to Martin Lopez. Again, if you hover over it, you can see his role, the VP of sales. We don't have an additional approver in this case, and our sales managers can approve or can discount up to 30% for SaaS products and 25% for hardware. Moving to our next step. In between our sales manager and our hierarchy, we had our deal desk. Let's not forget him. Our next step is our deal desk. He also reports to Martin in the same structure. Martin is our VP of sales. He's next in line. I think you're kind of getting the zigzag pattern at this point. So we have our VP, goes up to our CEO. We have an additional approver in here. We have our CFO. And then, as I mentioned, you have to have the last row to close the loop. In this case, it's our CEO, Peter. He has no approvers above him, and he can go up to a maximum of 100. All right. That was discount. It's pretty straightforward once you get the zigzag pattern. And we're going to now move on to the next example, which are margins. So margin is really interesting because when you think about margin, it's kind of like taking the values of discounts and turning it upside down. Because with discounts, the higher you go, the more approval you need. But with margins, it goes the other way around, right? Like the lower the margin, probably the more approval they'll need. So the real difference you'll notice here is our direction switch to descending. And in this case, we did decide to evaluate each product separately. Again, our structure remained exactly the same, right? Because we're still following the same hierarchy. But in this case, our values are inherently different because we're not looking at discount anymore, but rather we're looking at a margin, okay? So in this case, we're saying that our sales rep can go up to a 20 margin or then 15 and then 10. And then at the end, we're going all the way down as far as we can to a negative margin, okay? So same structure, except in this case, we're going descending. And remembering again, there has to always be the last line that has no approver above them. The third scenario that I want to show you is a bit of a combination, okay? rather than doing an active when true, so rather than having a workflow that is just always working behind the scenes, I want to show you a workflow that would only activate in a particular condition. In this case, we're going to look at total net as our criteria for activation. So in this case, we are still going to be evaluating the total sales discount, but we really only care to approve this value if our total net goes beyond a certain amount. So here again, this is showing you the flexibility of the tool that says, hey, we don't have to always look at everything, right? We can really get granular of when you want this condition to start working. So in this case, we put an active when of total net is greater than 10,000. Again, you can also say, total net is greater than 10,000 and total net is, less than 50,000 hypothetically. So you can get really, really granular in terms of like, what are the levels that you're trying to accomplish here? I removed it, but you got the point. We're still going ascending because we're looking at discount. Everything else stayed the same. And you'll notice that our table is also the same. Now, you can have two separate conditions, right? You can have your first one saying, I want this workflow to be for a total net that is less than 10,000. But then I want to mirror this exact workflow by duplicating it, which will appear right under. And I want to say, if it's over 10,000, I still have the same structure, everything stays the same, but I just want to go ahead and change my values. You can do that as well, all right? Okay, now let's see what this looks like from the sales mode. I prepared a playbook for you that's already been ready. I added some products in it. And you'll notice that I also made their primary tag visible because I thought that's really important, because when we're looking at general workflows, we are covering which tags are important to us. So in this case, we're going to look at just hardware products. Now let's show you a couple of different scenarios. In the sales discount, I am right now on a regular sales rep user. So that means that I have those limitations of thresholds. So let's say I want to go in and I want to put a sales discount for the entire deal of, let's do 20%. Okay, I put in 20%. Once this is done, you'll notice then the approval workflow has been triggered. If you hover over the group approvals, it will show you the people that are involved in this approval. So the sales rep or whoever's creating this quote has visibility as who is going to be receiving this quote for approval, which I think is also a good feature as well. Let's say we were to go a little bit further. Let's go for 45%. We're going to get a bit excited. The reason I wanted to show you this is because you'll now notice that there is a next step, which is Martin Lopez. The reason it does this is that it's because it's following the same zigzag hierarchy, right? The first step was Victoria and Oliver, sales managers. But according to our system, they can't approve 45%. They can only approve a part of that. So that means that 45% triggered also the next step in line, which was in this case, Martin Lopez. Okay. Also, if you hover, you'll see that it tells you why. It says Martin Lopez is part of this step because, and then it shows you the reason. We also have our margins working behind the scenes. Okay. So when I entered certain discounts, it changed our margins. All right. And that also triggered approval workflows. So it's actually really interesting. And I think the really good part of DealHub is as you're building, you can always test and see what it would look like from the other side. So it's not like you're going in blind. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Eran. And he's going to show you and talk a little bit more about how we notify these users of approvals and some other features as well.
Great. Thank you, Ariela. That was definitely very insightful and hopefully definitely very valuable for most of you developing workflows and trying to identify what could be a use case for your business. I do want to take you into some more key points and best practices that will help you to develop your own workflows, or either with the assistance of the DealHub team. Starting off with the workflow settings, you will find that next to the general workflow, we do have different other tabs here. Some of them we're going to touch base on our next session, so stay tuned for that. But on the workflow settings, we can control the workflow for each individual playbook. As you can see, we have multiple playbooks here. We are now choosing to do that on the SaaS proposal, but we can define settings for each and every one of our playbooks individually in case we have multiple playbooks. Another key feature of the workflows would be the capability to define the order on which we want to run the workflows. For example, if we want to make sure that we receive approval for the financial aspect of the quote, meaning margin discounts before any legal terms changes, payment terms, that would be setting up the general workflow first before triggering the rule base. If we want that to run in parallel, as we have duality in the approvers between the two elements or the two approval types, then we can just run them in parallel. Another capability would be running the workflow as an opportunity owner, or either running that as the submitter of the quote. Very valuable for teams that have deal desk behind the scenes or sales operations that go in and create the quotes on behalf of the account executives. And that's where this capability can mandate the same criteria, whether another person is creating or assisting with creating a quote on behalf of the quote owner. Another key capability, which we find very valuable when it comes to developing the workflows, and the ability to simulate very quickly and very agile manner what will be the approval workflows triggers for each and every role. Essentially, once we enable that, we can have a question in the playbook that will identify or simulate the user role in which we want to activate or engage the approval workflow against. This capability is also useful for for different capabilities for different use cases. So essentially, if you want to be able to control the workflow with utilizing a question within the playbook for different customizations, that can be also a useful element to be done. So let's take that into the next step. We have worked very hard. We have defined what we want to achieve. What is our organization structure? We have defined our approval workflow structure. The next step is actually running that. We won't be doing that live today with you on the call in sake of time, but we want to share with you some of the DealHub capabilities that will help you get a sense of what those might look like. The DealHub capabilities about approving the quote eventually behind the scenes falls into two capabilities. One of them is the dashboard. Essentially, your approvers will be able to, under their sales mode, to have a section which is going to be the pending approval. As they're going to log into the pending approval, they will always have a preview and a display here of all of the pending quotes for approval. They can either just highlight them and approve immediately, or even dive into those individually, download or view the quote itself, or either share that with a colleague to get their thought process for those approvers. Still keeping you with the DealHub screen. If I am an approver and I'm about to go on a leave and a planned vacation, I can always go into my user settings, open up my user settings, delegate approval, and I do have the ability to delegate my approvals to anyone else down the line. Now, this is also a new capability that we have recently released out, which essentially provides you the capability to delegate approval even to an existing workflows. Essentially, behind the scenes, the system will reevaluate all of the quotes that you're being assigned to and resend those over to the delegated person that you have chosen. This is very valuable and very powerful to keep in mind as you're going on a leave and making sure that there is a backup to your approvers. There is always a capability for the DealHub admin to go in, impersonate, and enable that on behalf of the specific user. But if we make that a habit, just makes things a whole lot easier. Another capability that can be done by our DealHub team would be to send a daily reminder to the that will identify all of the pending approvals in their queue. That may look like very similar to this report. In this case, what I'm showing you is the same report that you're going to see in case you get a daily reminder. In this example, what you see is a delegation approval report, but essentially lists the same capabilities The only difference would be from this to another one would be that there would be no delegation notion here. I'm an approver and I'm not looking into DealHub. I don't want to log into DealHub. I basically want to log into get everything into my email and approve everything from the email. For that purpose, we have, and what I'm showing you now is the DealHub knowledge base. We have a dedicated section for the approval workflows for you to learn everything that we just shared with you on the call. More specifically about specific workflow notifications, we have a very long section, section out there in the document that really illustrates and describes each and every one of those steps along the way. What is the content that is going to be sent out to the client, to your approvers, and as well as to the quote creators behind the scenes. Let me show you a few of those, but you can always reach out to that if you're going to access the DealHub knowledge base itself. The first one would be obviously proposal approval request. That is where this email will be sent out to basically from the system, basically upon submitting a quote to the quote approver listed inside the approval settings. The email will look similar to what we see on the screen now. It will include the description of which workflow has been triggered. If there is more than one, that will be identified here in the same email. And essentially, we are going to be combining the emails notifications sent out to the clients, to the approvers, as well as the submitters based on the duality. So if there is two approval workflows generated, activated, triggered against the same person or against the same approver for the same quote, we're going to consolidate that into the same email template. We do have the description or the comments that made by the submitter of the quote. In this case, it's just listed as please approve, but definitely more descriptive information will get the approval, the approver more insights as to the reasoning behind that. Proposal information, all of the information about the opportunity, which definitely can be extended more than that we see here. Some numbers and financial information about total gross margin or total nets and individual listing of them, of all of the products included within the proposal. What we see here on the screen definitely can be customized. It can be done through the DealHub screen. There is a very detailed information how to change the approval email template. I won't go through that. We can do that individually and fairly easy if you're familiar with the DealHub output document configuration screen. It is very similar configuration element to that. This is the only email that is configurable. The others are going to be system controlled and cannot be modified as of now. It potentially could be in the future. I'm an approver. I've received an approval request from one of my account executives, and I'm going to go in, and what I can do upon approving in two ways. I can either click on the approve within the email itself, or I can either just respond back to the email with approve text, and that will get the quote approved, or else I can go to my approval dashboard and approve from that screen. And essentially at that point, I'll be able to get this as a submitter of the quote. I'll basically will be getting this proposal approvals information. Indication that the quote has been approved will be received or rejected with a thumbs down and with a not so pleasant red message. The comments are also going to be made available here on the screen in case being provided by the approver. And the next step will be for the actual approver of the quote to receive confirmation that whomever submitted the quote actually received my approval or rejection. Just making sure that we close the loop, that we don't send emails to someone who actually is not available at this point, or is out of the office, or is not even configured well into the system. So we are closing the loop and making sure that all communication are going through well. The information that we see here that I've shared with you now about all of the approval information, comments, who approved that, delegation, if there was at any point in time will get synced over to your CRM into a custom object. So at any given time, you can actually receive the information on a custom object on your CRM itself for better tracking and auditing capabilities. Last point that I want to make is that there is always a capability for the account executive to recall their approval from the after submitted quotes. There is capability to recall the approval and basically be able to pull it back in case there is a need to make changes or make some adjustments before resubmitting again. With that, we're going to finish up today's presentation. This is really very, very much a lot of insights that we've shared with you today, and we are welcoming your questions now. We have received a couple of questions from the folks on the call that we want to extend those, and hopefully those are going to be some of those Q&As may be beneficial for the rest of the audience. I will pass it between Ariela and myself just to keep the dynamics and the flow of the conversation. So keep on sending those questions. If we won't address some of those questions today on the call, we will definitely get back to you either through your CSM or either through the support team. So we'll definitely keep that in shape. So the first question that we received, which is definitely something that we hear a lot from our clients, is that if we have 3 people in the same level and only one of them needs to approve, essentially, how would I know who approved from that specific group of people? So I will pass it over to Ariela.
This is a really great question with actually quite a simple answer, so it's nice. If you have 3 people in the same level, but only one of them needed to approve, and at the end of the day, let's say only one of them approved, then in the sales mode, when the sales rep sees the quote, they will see that it says approved as part of a group. And then if you go back to your CRM, it will also sync back the exact name of who approved as part of that group.
Awesome. Thank you, Ariela. This is definitely something very valuable. You will find that our custom object that we sync back to the CRM definitely shares a lot of insightful information about what happened in that approval workflows. Another question that came up from the audience is, as we showed you in this general workflow, it is very much based on the role of the user that we actually sync over from your CRM. That dependency is very critical. And one of the questions that we received from the audience was, how can you monitor a change to the user role of the employees themselves in the CRM? For example, in our organization, it was changed in Salesforce, but no alert was sent, and it pretty much affected the approval workflow. Essentially, new employees, employee change, promotion, and so forth. And that can translate, as we saw now on the technical session, to the discount level or to the margin calculations for the approval workflow themselves. This is a very important topic. We have touched about that just a little bit, but definitely worth examining specifically your each organization's needs and capabilities on that level. Essentially, the objective is that any new salesperson that joins the DealHub environment will inherit already the approval workflow structure that has been laid down in by your administrator. That is really the intention. When it comes to role changes, essentially, what will happen potentially if that person, let's separate that between an actual salesperson that needs to get approval or to an approver to the approval workflow. As a salesperson, you would basically be able to, as an admin, set up a custom field, which with what we identify as the DealHub custom or the DealHub user role or user position that can be separated from your actual or internal organization structure. Essentially, extend the capability to differentiate between the organization structure or changes that happens to the approval levels that may apply to that specific user. So that is one way to overcome that and avoid any such mistakes. Another element is that on the approval workflows, and let me quickly share my screen just to go over that. On the approval workflow itself, we do have what we call the validation. The validation will help you to make sure that any approval workflow is accurate to its full, meaning that there are users behind those approval workflows in those roles. And if there was any change to the user roles and to the structure, that will basically identify that. Alongside with it, as an admins, that doesn't really just mean for a draft version. As an admins as well, you will potentially get these potential errors in the approval workflow configuration, which will definitely explain the scenario that you're facing. In this scenario, we have a test that has been done, and we can see that one of the steps of the users have been missing. All of that again is available to our basically through our knowledge base, so that can be extended down the line. Passing it over and moving on to the next question. We've got a handful of those. I'm going to stop the share. Ariela, pass you the question about daily reminder for approvals. We understand that this is one of the hottest topics that we are getting as well from our customers.
Yes, definitely a hot topic. Daily reminder of approvals. The question was, is this something that an admin can set up? Does this need to be done by the DealHub team? Best practice, just reach out to your CSM, your team at DealHub. We can go ahead and activate this for you at your request. So yeah, it's as simple as that. Just ask for it and we'll make it happen.
Cool. Yeah, and those definitely will be very valuable, as they will consolidate all of your approvals in one email. So even if you are, as an approver, have multiple approvals that went out to your customers, you will just get one email that consolidates all of your approval requests or pending approvals in your backlog. One of the other questions that we got, and I think that's going to be our last question for today, is if a higher level of approval is triggered, let's say 45%, and the lower level approvers cannot approve that much, does it still ask for their approval? Okay, very much I want to say typical use case, but definitely something that we see coming up from our customers. So in a sense, our best practice is to create an hierarchy for the approval, so that if a 45% is given, it needs to go to the lower level and build it up all the way up to the highest level of manager, and then can allow pretty much the highest manager to override the lower level approvers. Essentially, once you build the approval workflow in the sense of that example that we've shared today, and we would reach that 45% thresholds, all of the sub or underlying approvers downstream, as we call that, will get automatically approved. We have a capability to either present the approval request to all of the approvers levels, and essentially by that you can extend the notifications or awareness of everybody in the approval chain that there is an approval pending that needs to be approved. And definitely you can override the level by the top level manager. So essentially, if I have access to more than 45% discount, upon my approval, I will approve downstream all of my organization hierarchy that reports over to me or has lower capability to approve than myself.